Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So this week we're coming back to poetry, and again we're coming to unexpected poetry with Citizen by Claudia Rankine. So Citizen, an American lyric, is about the American experience of racism on small levels and on much larger levels. So the experiences written about in this book range from the kind of daily occurrences of racism, things that happen on the subway, all the way up to the much bigger systematic issues of police brutality and things like that. Big and small issues all being symptoms of the same thing. And there's a nice progression in this book as the subject matter gets more complicated and gets heavier. The form also gets more complicated throughout the length of the book. So it's interesting, the genre of this. It has been treated like poetry as far as people judging it. It's won a lot of major contests in the category of poetry. On the back of the book, it identifies it as poetry/essays, but really it's hard to tell sometimes when we're in something that feels more like poetry or when we're in something that feels more like an essay. Really, the whole text blends a lot of different elements and defies genre expectations. This isn't a text that's so easily put in one of those boxes, which is what a lot of modern writers are doing. They're not limiting themselves to genre constraints. And in that way, Citizen's a really unique experience in reading it. So as an example of something that comes in more of an essay part, there's a section of the book where she's writing about Serena Williams and some of the major controversial events in her career. And this paragraph comes from that. What does a victorious or defeated Black woman's body in a historically white space look like? Serena and her big sister Venus Williams brought to mind Zora Neale Hurston's "I feel most colored when I am thrown against a sharp white background." This appropriated line, stenciled on canvas by Glenn Ligon, who used plastic letter stencils, smudging oil sticks and graphite to transform the word into abstractions, seemed to be ad copy for some aspect of life for all Black bodies. Hurston's statement has been played out on the big screen by Serena and Venus. They win sometimes, they lose sometimes. They've been injured, they've been happy, they've been sad, ignored, booed mightily, they've been cheered, and through it all, and evident to all, were those people who are enraged they are there at all. Graphite against a sharp white background. So you can see that reads and sounds a lot more like an essay, but the essays incorporate very poetic elements, and the things that look visually more like poems incorporate a lot of the things you might expect to see in essays. And particularly in the first half of the book, there aren't a lot of clear boundary lines to when one piece stops and another starts. So in that section, she describes this piece of art. So this quote from Zora Neale Hurston, it's from the essay, How It Feels to Be Colored Me. I feel most colored when I'm thrown against a sharp white background. So that quote really comes back up throughout the text and compromises the central theme that all of the sort of instances of racism described seem to blossom from. There's just a large catalog in here of just small little moments of racism, the kind of things that happen when you're getting your coffee in the morning and things like that. And I think every single one of those instances really lines up with that quote really well. So to give an example of a part of this that reads more like a poem as we would expect it, The rain this morning pours from the gutters, and everywhere else it is lost in the trees. You need your glasses to single out what you know is there, because doubt is inexorable. You put on your glasses. The trees, their bark, their leaves, even the dead ones, are more vibrant wet. Yes, and it's raining. Each moment is like this, before it can be known, categorized as similar to another thing and dismissed. It has to be experienced. It has to be seen. What did he just say? Did she really just say that? Did I hear what I think I heard? Did that just come out of my mouth, his mouth, your mouth? The moment stinks. Still, you want to stop looking at the trees. You want to walk out and stand among them. And as light as the rain seems, it still rains down on you. So we're seeing the poems. They look like narrative poems. They're like sort of block text, little paragraphs generally. She'll have some sections that have shorter paragraphs like that. But we see lots of this repetition with slight alterations throughout the whole book, like the my mouth, his mouth, your mouth thing. That happens all over this collection. Yeah, and it's interesting. That poem comes pretty early in the collection, but after finishing reading the whole thing and coming back and looking at that again, she is, in a way, in this collection, categorizing all of these experiences, like she says in this poem, but before she categorizes them, she gives a moment to experience and see each of them, and they're all falling under the category of the theme of this book. So that's really interesting to see that this is definitely a book that would be interesting on a reread, even just looking back at a couple poems of note right now while I'm filming this. Another poem that really stuck with me, this one comes closer to the end. Close to traffic, the previously unexpressive street fills with small bodies. One father, having let go of his child's hand, stands on the steps of a building and watches. You can't tell which child is his, though you follow his gaze. It seems to belong to all the children as it envelops their play. You are about to enter your building, but do not want to leave the scope of his vigilance. I don't know, there's something really striking and beautiful about that one, and it's coming close to the end, and I do think that this collection, the last 3 or 4 poems, make for a really resonant ending. So as you've probably noticed, there aren't titles to these poems. There aren't super clear boundaries. It's mostly using white space to sort of create natural breaks. And the poems all bleed into each other a little bit. There'll be a phrase at the end of one poem that appears in the next. They kind of pick up where one leaves off. There are these echoes of language throughout the collection that are really interesting and tie all of the individual works together into like one long piece. So yeah, there's lots of sound elements, lots of that repetition that I talked about that comes up a lot, especially in the this repetition of like, did he just say that? Did she just say that? All of those things, which kind of really puts you in the moment of those like little problematic interactions. It feels very much like one cohesive train of thought. It's hard to pull out a piece of this and talk about it on its own because it is so connected and interweaved, even though it is poetry and essays and all of this. You know, like a novel, you can't just read a chapter in the middle and have it completely make sense. Something else really cool about this is that it features a lot of visual art. So the art piece I already showed you. There's just lots of moments in this book where there are photographs and images. And that's interesting because I feel like the places where the art happens in this book, they're really natural breaks. I I think, I already said that a lot of like the white space and the page breaks control the pace of this book. And I think when the words stop and a piece of visual art comes in, it makes for a really meaningful pause in the reading. And it just makes sense, like the way I think about it, the way that, fiction writing is akin to film and TV and movies. Poetry is more akin to photography and painting and those kinds of visual arts. So working that into this collection makes a lot of sense. It feels really seamless. I think the art's really well chosen and matches up super well with the text that's around it. So reading Citizen for the first time really reminds me of one of the most important things reading can do for us, and that it makes us more empathetic people. So it is impossible to not have some biases. We all come from different backgrounds, and our worldview is inherently limited no matter who you are. And reading is a shortcut to broadening your worldview, seeing through somebody else's eyes, and finding emotional connections to people that are different from you. So you don't have to see the whole world and travel and do all of that. You can learn about other people and become a more understanding, compassionate person from home. And I think that is really the long-term effect that I take away from this collection. There's obviously a lot of other things that we get from reading. It's entertainment, it's, getting to experience something beautiful or interesting or exciting. But I think we can do all of that and still improve a little bit as people. Also, there has been some controversy in the poetry world lately about sort of poets who are traditionally privileged and have had good careers feeling like they don't get that anymore because there are other voices writing and being read and getting a lot of success in poetry. And this collection was very, very successful. But my viewpoint on it is that more voices and more diversity in people who are creating art is always a good thing. And it's silly to think that these people are stealing some kind of audience, because I really think poets like Claudia Rankine are creating new audiences in poetry, which is really, really important. It's something that I hope I will be able to do one day. It's something I really appreciate in writers who I think are attempting to do that and want to be accessible and want to spark interest in poetry in a much wider audience. Okay, so those are some of my thoughts on Citizen. I think it's got a lot of cool elements. I think the genre bending is really interesting, and I think could maybe make this a better read for someone who's more accustomed to prose. This is something that is poetry, but also in a lot of ways is not poetry as we know it. So it could appeal to fans of different genres, I think. And it's well done. It's a really important collection in recent years. It marks some sort of shift, I think. This came out in 2014, I think. So I think poetry is changing for the better because of writers like Claudia Rankine. Okay, that's all I have for this week. Thanks for watching.